to this edition of Silicon Grapevine. Today, my guest is Donald McClymont, founder and CEO of Indie Semiconductor. Donald, hello.
Hello, Nitin. Thanks for having me.
So, I would like to dig into a little bit about you and your background and what drives you, what you're passionate about. But before we do that, just tell me what you're up to. What do you do right now? What's your role?
So I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Indie Semiconductor, which is a pure-play automotive fabless semiconductor company, headquartered at least in the United States.
Okay, and so you founded that in what, 2007?
Yeah, 2007. Okay. So it's we spent maybe the first, I'm going to get this wrong now, 13, 14 years as a private company. We built slowly. Initially, we bootstrapped the company for the first 5 years, so we ran without external funding, which was tough. I'm not doing that again, I will tell you that for nothing. After about 5 years, we had managed to get to a reasonable revenue stream. We were running about $3 million, of which $2 million was product sales before we took our first dollar of venture capital. We were shipping, selling, manufacturing semiconductor company, and we were 11 people.
That's, that must have been quite tough because most people go for funding pretty early on. So, what was the toughest part about trying to grow organically in the beginning?
Well, the sort of, it sounds like a cliche, but you have to wear many hats. You have to wear every hat. And so basically it was myself and 10 engineers. I'm an engineer also, so I even did a little engineering work, but I basically fulfilled every other function in the organization at that point, from accounting to legal to HR to cleaning the toilets to, sales and marketing. And when you're a small company, you can't really afford one man for one job function. You got to be flexible. But this was really an extreme case of it. We worked day and night for the first 5 years, didn't sleep much. Caused my wife to actually join the company just so she could see me during daylight hours as opposed to sleeping. But yeah, it was a big ask, but it was a noble goal that we really set out to achieve, because as a net result of that, we managed to maintain greater than control of the board and also of the cap table, really through the point that we agreed to IPO. And having that control as an entrepreneur is really the most important thing. Most people do this kind of escapade really to have control over their own destiny, to feel that they're really doing something for themselves. It's not really about money. It's about control and kind of fulfilling what you want to do.
And the IPO wasn't an end game, because you obviously that was a point when you said, okay, bit of relief. I have some money, some cash injection into the business. We can grow this and scale this. Is that what you were sort of thinking?
Yeah, for sure. We built our business based around the automotive industry, which has pros and cons. Number one, it takes forever to get designed in and forever to get to revenue. So we had to be extremely patient, which is why we spent such a long time as a private company. But once you do get designed in, then you're kind of locked in. You've got a very nice sort of runway of revenue which you can build and grow. And it makes for a really good story for an early stage IPO, because you know that you're going to grow over the first 3, 4, 5 years without really doing anything actually after you IPO. So for us it was for sure a turning point. It gave us access to public market capital and so forth. But as you say, it's very much just the start. Since we came out, we've 10x the revenue in the first couple of years. We continue to grow at that clip. And once you're public, once you have a decent balance sheet, you have so much more credibility. You have the possibility to really attach to the biggest design wins in the business. You can really drive the growth of your business in another 5-year phase beyond that, and you get invited to better parties too.
I think there was the Goldman Sachs award you got. So yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, always happy to get an award. To be quite honest, I'm not really very public focused, so I don't typically tend to seek them out. Goldman Sachs has been a partner of ours for, I guess, 4 or 5 years now. They've helped us in many transactions, so very happy to get that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like money's not important, but when you see the revenue growing in your company, it's a good way of keeping score. That's kind of what I'm focused on.
Well, I'll tell the viewers what it was. It was you were one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs of 2020.
Oh, that's right. I forgot the intriguing word. And that one was, several people came to me and says, this intriguing thing, there's kind of a negative connotation about that, and particularly in certain other modern European languages. All my French colleagues said, well, if you're saying you're intriguant, that means you're kind of sneaky.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we won't go into that. Let's go into a little bit about how you got into engineering. What? I mean, you were up in the very north of Scotland,
Yeah.
and you grew up there, and I think your football team is from up there as well, Partick Thistle.
Almost, yeah. Well, they're in Glasgow. That's a longer story.
A long story. Okay,
But
let's start with the journey first into
Sure.
into
Yeah.
electronics.
Well, so I grew up in a fairly modest working class background. My dad actually worked at the famous Invergordon aluminium smelter through the 70s and into the 80s, or at least just into the 80s, which closed down in 1980, laying off 900 men in a community of a few thousand, which really sort of devastated the local area. And so my dad was, he learned from his experience, and he decided he was going to impart that to me as hard as he possibly could, which, was one of the things he gave me with for life. He said, stick in at school, go to university, study hard, get a good job, and don't end up in a dead end job like me. So I did that. I worked my ass off in high school, got entry into a bunch of universities in the south of Scotland, which was as far as my imagination stretched at that point. And then, so I decided, well, what am I going to study? So I was maths and science, really, background. That's kind of where I was best. And at that point, the electronics industry, late or sort of mid 80s, was really taking off. It was one of the most exciting things on the planet. So I decided, okay, not because it was exciting, but because it seemed like it was a good prospect, I decided to do that. So I kind of fell into it. I will say I got a great education at Glasgow Uni, thanks to those guys. And also through a couple of what I would describe as somewhat visionary professors at the time who were beginning to embrace the advent of the European Union. Of course, it came to a sticky end, but ultimately their goal was to make us maybe more mobile within the European Union. So they forced us to take business classes. They forced us also to take language classes. And so that's what took me into working in Europe. And as luck would have it, I ended up working in Germany for a division of Philips, which probably is now buried somewhere in NXP, which gave me a language. And my first experience was in the integrated circuit design business. So I actually worked on a teletext decoder chip for an early TV set in let's say 1989-90, I guess it was.
Right.
And that's kind of the rest is history. So
that was the internet of the 1980s, I guess.
That was the internet of the 80s. So I will say I swore the internet would never catch on because teletext had taken care of it already.
Yeah. So you were working on teletext chips.
Yep.
And then so that brought you back into an internship. Into Wolfson then. That's
right. Yeah. So I joined Wolfson 92 after I graduated, which was also a great place to work. There's maybe only 30 people at the time. There's a famous picture that roams around Edinburgh, which was taken in the back car park of Wolfson, which I'm in. And although nobody recognizes me anymore because I guess I had a tough paper round. But it was a great period. There was a huge entrepreneurial spirit. We didn't realize how good the team was at the time. Probably 4 or 5 of the 20 something that are in that picture went on to be CEOs of their own companies.
And it was very strong on mixed signal.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah. And people often ask me, was I a digital or analog engineer? So I usually say I was a mixed signal engineer, which meant I was equally incompetent at both.
Yeah. So that sort of got you to Wolfson, and I think you've got an interesting story where David Milne had to do a trade.
David Milne was he was a great leader, and he managed to keep that place together through multiple funding rounds, and being days away from not making payroll, I'm sure, which is the life of an entrepreneur. But when I joined, there was a very senior engineer who had left to join Philips. And I was joining, having had an internship at Philips within recent months, and he definitely put a massive spin on it when he told the rest of the group that we were just trading one guy from Philips for another guy from Philips. The fact that the guy who was leaving had probably 10, 15 years of experience, and I had like 4 months. It was neither here nor there. But like my father-in-law always said, a story doesn't have to be true; you just have to tell it well.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And what's so? You made sort of transition through several companies, and how did you get into sort of being in the US? because you're now based in Southern California.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. So I mean, I guess again, it's all a sort of causal series of events. Because I decided to go into electronics, I got into IC design through the fact that I took a placement in Germany. Because I went to Germany, I learned German. And then a job came up, which was based in Germany, and it sounded exciting. It was not long after the wall had come down. There was a company over there who had been kind of like founded is perhaps the wrong word, out of one of the former East German factories. It was actually the largest producer of SRAM for the Eastern Bloc.
oh, okay.
And so, I mean, cut a long story short, it's basically now where XFAB is headquartered. That's what, a company became at least partially XFAB. But at that point, they were beginning to try and build a commercial company out of a fraction of the workforce that had been set up there. And it just sounded like an exciting thing to do. Going there with a language was kind of key because the second language for most of the inhabitants there was Russian.
Mm.
And I learned a lot about life during that period. I sort of mixed my time between a little bit of commercial and still doing some RFIC design, which took me into early products for the 2G digital cellular telephony, which took me to my next job in Fujitsu in the west of Germany, where I moved into sales and marketing for almost the same products.
Mm.
That took me into the US where I joined Connexent Wireless, which ultimately became Skyworks.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I had a deal of experience in dealing with the then dominant European cell phone manufacturers, which was a good ride for me. At that point, I spent a couple of years with Connexent Wireless, had a good ride, got a great product into production, and then met these two crazy guys from Caltech who had developed this sort of awesome piece of technology actually to make the world's first CMOS 5-watt power amplifier for cell phone.
Okay.
So, I mean, for me, it was right in my wheelhouse. It was exactly the market I was working in. It was kind of a no-brainer that it was going to be successful as a technology. So I jumped out, joined those guys, and we did that startup from 2002 until the same founding team then founded Indie.
Mm.
But we had a good run in that particular company. We shipped 50 million parts before we sold the company eventually to Skyworks. They shipped above 1 billion of them, actually. It was our single largest selling part number after they acquired the company. So it was a good story, and we learned a lot along the way. It was our first Santo Road venture-backed company. So we learned the ins and outs and pros and cons of that. And I think we put the experience to good use in the building of this company.
So, I mean, that takes us, you went from cell phone to now, yeah, very much automotive.
Right.
And I guess the automotive is the big thing that everybody in our industry is talking about. Is it as big as everybody talks about, or is it basically something that allows us to sort of develop stuff for many other industries?
No, I mean, I actually I would say it's now beginning to lead
Okay.
in many technologies. What we find is that there's often, let's say, smaller nichier applications where we can prototype stuff that will eventually go to prime time in the automotive industry. But the big need and the volume for many of these technologies is there for sure. I mean, you might be wondering why I went from cell phones to no wheels to four wheels.
Yeah.
I mean, really, that was a commercial decision on our part. When we were toiling away in the cell phone industry, when we were deploying a new technology, basically it took somewhere between 3 and 5 years of investment to get to the point where we might begin to return. Problem with the cell phone industry is, maybe our return cycle was 18 months, which means that we couldn't layer on. And as a thinly funded venture-backed company, that just wasn't a good equation.
Right.
So when we started this company, it was very different to the previous company, which started maybe in a more classical sort of Silicon Valley way, based on a bunch of patents that came out of a university. In our case, we just decided to build it on a financial premise, which was we wanted to enter markets which were the other way around, where we may invest for about the same time, but the return cycle had to be 2 or 3x of the investment cycle, which meant that we could layer on. It meant that we could build a company which was more sustainable. But we had to be patient. So that's why we spent a long time as a private company. But it worked out. And where that business model worked the best, and also our technology that we were beginning to develop at that point began to resonate, was in the automotive industry, which really coincided with a step change for that industry. They began to realize, I mean, really the vanguard of it was in user experience, where suddenly a penny dropped that mechanical gauges and switches weren't going to cut it anymore, where there was a generation that were used to touchscreens and mobile devices. And that's really what drove the vanguard of that, and then electrification came along, and then along with electrification came autonomous driving.
Correct.
Which is, I would describe the automotive industry kind of like the digital telephony market in the early to mid 90s. It hasn't quite got to the point where it's built a platform based off technologies like the cell phone business did with communications channel and GPS and good user interface, but it's almost to that point now. With a few more good steps as an industry, we will get there, which will enable a bunch of people to be able to develop apps on top of this new platform, which will make the user experience much more rich and varied.
I think that's quite interesting because I've attended the Future of the Car conference in London a few times, and yet they do talk in that language about how to develop on top of this sort of system.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting.
About it, but the implementation is still wanting a little bit, and a deal of it is because they're large, slower moving companies, and they all want a say. And when they get together in a consortium, it kind of becomes a camel, the horse designed by committee. But somebody will begin to take the lead in that. I'm pretty sure.
We keep hearing from lots of different angles about innovating the way we innovate. And do you think the traditional, and might be very difficult for you to say because they're your customers, but traditional tier ones, car manufacturers, are going to have to think differently to enable
very much so
this sort of new thinking to be implemented?
Yeah, very, very much so. Particularly the tier ones. They've been used to building systems around discrete elements from our business because integration wasn't there. Now integration as it comes means that their added value is diminished. So they have to find ways to invest and verticalize to make sure that they can defend the gross margin position that they deserve, or not, as the case may be. Those that grow will succeed, and those that don't, maybe they become glorified CMs. In the case of the OEMs, I would say, if you look at what Tesla did, particularly in the software space, they developed monolithically, much more like the consumer industry or the communications industry would, as opposed to the traditional automotive industry, which is much more pieced together, bits and pieces here and there, interfaces poorly defined. They're getting there, and it is, I'd say, harder for the incumbents because they have a lot of baggage to deal with. Somebody like Tesla or one of the new entrants, where they were blessed with a clean sheet of paper, so that helped.
I drove a Lucid when I was in the Bay Area a few weeks ago, and it's much more. There's much more in there than a Tesla, and you do. There's a lot of tech which you can get distracted with if you're old and traditional like me, but I think if you're a youngster, there's a lot more also there. And I think one of the things I was quite impressed with was the torque and the acceleration. Coming off onto 280, I think I was coming on in Northern California, and coming onto via the ramp. The guy who was taking me out said, "Now just put your foot down," and I did. And there's 3 modes, and it just shot like a bullet. And I thought, "Wow, this is amazing." But it's not just the speed; it's the whole sort of luxury that it feels now. Yeah. And I think you pay the price as well on that.
Yeah, I think that's true. You got to be careful when you're of a certain age that you don't apply the metrics that you applied when you were 18 years old, which was how it looked and what it sounded like and the torque and horsepower. Because the generation of car buyers today are much more focused on user experience and how the car maybe drives itself as opposed to how you drive it.
True.
And so the challenge for the OEMs really is to build their brand differentiation around those kind of features, as opposed to literally how it drives and the solidity and how it goes around corners. I still like that, but I gotta break myself in that sense when I'm deciding if something's good or not, because we make investment decisions based on a feature that we believe in.
Exactly. Let's turn a little bit about. You're an engineer, and engineers don't really get excited normally. What excites you? Is there much that excites you about industry or life right now?
Yeah, I mean, I like to make things, and the best way of keeping score is to watch your revenue continue to grow, and that's what drives me out of bed in the morning and gets me to push the organization as hard as I possibly can to continue to grow and succeed. And I'd say when you look back retrospectively, I mean, I've had a 30-year career now, and you look at the electronics that we had and the tools that we were, able to use to, go about our daily lives. I mean, what we've developed as an industry in 30 years is something to be vastly proud of, and it continues to grow. Maybe a little more evolutionary than it was in the early 80s, mid 80s, but still it's exciting. I mean, still we get to bring new features and new things of value to whatever it is that the consumer or the user wants, and that's still exciting to me.
Well, I mean, also it must be really fun to, sort of marry your two passions.
That's true. I mean, and I love cars too, and I also like the smell of oil and petrol too. So I'm going to get an EV, but I'm still not quite there. I dither a lot when it takes me 10 years to decide which car to buy typically. So. And then I keep them forever. But I'm on that path now. I did drive one EV that I really liked, Porsche Taycan Turbo S, which was just a phenomenal beast. It was maybe the first E911 might be interesting, but I guess that won't come till 2030, I hear.
Yeah, well, I haven't driven one yet, but I maybe will try. Also, I think the technology in cars is something that you're able to drive, which is actually, it must be quite satisfying.
Yeah, it is nice, and it's nice when you pick up a car, even if it's a rental car, and then you know that you've got whatever $25-30 of content in here, makes you feel good.
Now, tell me, what are the things that you think you would say to a young Donald McClymont today? Yeah, it's knowing what you know today. What would you tell?
I think more by luck than judgment, I ended up staying a designing, functioning, useful member of society as an engineer for longer than I'd expected in my career. And having that sort of technical background stood me in good stead for many, many years. And I think if I'd switched into the commercial side of the business earlier than I did, I think that would have been detrimental. So, I mean, learning something technically useful, which means that you understand truly what it is that you make for a living, was for me as part of my career very differentiating, I think. And as a follow-on for that, I felt that once you have a technical background and it makes you curious about new technologies, then you continue to learn as you go. And as long as you continue to do that, you become more useful. You can stay ahead of the game. You can make better decisions as a business manager. And that's what I would say. Keep learning. Don't ever stop learning. Learn something useful, and then keep learning on top of it as you go through your career.
And then can you also be a successful entrepreneur that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, of course. I mean, it's very hard to interact, let alone manage with guys who are borderline genius, or maybe over the genius border, in terms of what they're able to bring to the party. And you better be able to at least impedance match with them to have a conversation where you can understand 30% of what they say. That way that you gain respect, and you can drive progress with that. If you're a pure business guy who drives it by the numbers, it's harder.
I like that term you've phrased, and I'm going to use it at the party next time I go. I'm impedance matching with you.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, Donald, thank you very much.
All right, Nitin, thanks. It was a great pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.